good, Mets Nation? Welcome to another edition of Straight Outta Flushing. On this week's show, we're going to be talking about an injury to the Mets ace, why the Mets pitching staff has been so dominant this season, and what's up with the good vibes at Citi Field in 2025. So, let's get the show started. Start off with the biggest news and notes surrounding the Mets this week. And the Mets, they rolled through the Nationals for a sweep earlier this week, but all eyes were on the mound. And they were on Kodai Senga. Now, the righty ace, he was dealing 0 earned runs through 5 innings on Tuesday before this routine play turned into a scary moment. Pete Alonso flips the ball to first. Senga makes a leap to try to catch it and immediately goes down, grabbing at his right leg. Post-game, we found out it was a hamstring strain. An MRI revealed it's low grade, but the Mets, they're playing it safe, placing Senga on the 15-day injured list. Now, let's be real. This is a big loss. Senga's been one of the best pitchers in baseball this season, rocking a 1.47 ERA over 13 starts. And he's been the Mets' most reliable arm in big spots. But the good news, this isn't a season ender. If all goes well, he could be back by early July, right around the All-Star break. So, to fill the roster spot, the Mets called up reliever Max Kranick, a local kid who grew up a Mets fan, went to Shea every Sunday with his dad, and even got a text from David Wright when he joined the club after pitching a really strong showing throughout spring training. Now, Kranick, he made headlines back in 2021 when he threw 5 perfect innings in his major league debut with the Pittsburgh Pirates before a rain delay shut him down. Now he's got a chance to contribute in the orange and blue. And speaking of contributions, Paul Blackburn will likely slide into Senga's starting spot for now. He's been solid this year, and if he can hold down the fort, this team stays right on track. The Mets did drop their series to the Rays over the weekend. A tough blown lead on Friday exposed some bullpen flaws, but make no mistake, they're still 15-6 over their last 21 games, and they're still sitting atop the NL East. Senga's down, but not out. Kranick's up. He's living his dream. And the Mets, they're just going to have to keep moving forward. All right, it's time for this week's Dugout Discussions. And if you've been watching the Mets this season, you know the story. Pitching staff's a group that entered the year with plenty of question marks, but they've been flat out dominant, at least until this weekend when they got swept by the Rays. But today, I'm thrilled to be joined by one of the best pitching minds in the game of baseball. He's the founder of Pitcher List. His name is Nick Pollack. You see him right there. Nick, welcome to Straight Outta Flushing. Let's talk some Mets arms. How you doing?
What is happening? Thanks so much for having me back, Dex. It's great to see you. And pitching, oh my gosh, it is so good with the Mets right now.
Yeah, no, the pitching is good with the Mets right now. I know, like I said, it might be a little bit tainted by what happened this weekend against the Rays, but pitching's been really good this season.
Yeah.
So, Nick, let's start with this, because when this season started, I think few expected this Mets rotation to be one of the best in baseball. So from your perspective, what has been the biggest reason that this group has outperformed expectations thus far?
Yeah, it's been really strange to see it. And really, a lot of the guys are performing at their best right now. David Peterson, for example, is pitching as well as I've seen him, especially against the Dodgers. That game was incredible, utilizing all 4 of his pitches, changeup, sinker, slider, changeup, super effectively, even the curve getting involved as well, and taking advantage of his 7+ feet of extension. This is a huge thing that we're seeing a lot in the pitching world right now. Guys who are able to get closer to the plate when they deliver, and then how to utilize their arsenal to take advantage of that. David Peterson does it really well with 2 different fastballs for strikes, and of course those 2 secondary pitches underneath. But then you also have Clay Holmes, and there were a lot of questions about him and his ability to step into the rotation after being a reliever with the Yankees for so long. And all we've seen are all the questions of his volatility, the ability to throw strikes with his sinker or his slider and his sweeper, his kick change. He's been able to work out jams inside of games very effectively and be able to find the adjustment he needs to make to ensure that he throws more strikes. Those 2 guys in particular have really surprised me this year. And I gotta say, the Mets, to see the entire rotation pitching at their peak is not something we normally see.
No, it is not. I think Mets fans everywhere have been a little bit shocked by this. Not something you normally see. Now, when it comes to, you talked a little about why we've been seeing this, but the Mets, their staff is getting credit for its pitching lab and the development program. How have you seen the things translate from the pitching lab and development program to the results that we're seeing on the field? And do you think this has a lot to do with Mets pitching coach Jeremy Hefner being able to get so much success out of his players?
Yeah, definitely. When you see guys who are able to get out of jams more effectively, I do look to the pitching staff a lot because that is about making those in-game adjustments effectively and in the moment. And that is something you work with your pitching coach a ton, especially those mound visits and how do you get out of this specific situation. Definitely a lot of credit to Hefner for that. But when it comes to the pitching lab, the other two guys I didn't mention who have really had success this year are Griffin Canning and Tyler McGill. Save for, of course, the recent performances of Griffin Canning. However, what he's done differently is locate that slider and changeup much better out of the middle of the plate than in previous seasons, as well as adding extra drop to both of those pitches. I didn't expect that moving into 2025, and that's a big reason for his success thus far. And then you have Tyler McGill, another extension guy like David Peterson, who has really worked hard at figuring out his slider this year. We've seen it go in and out a little bit, but it's brand new. He has his slower pitch that he throws down and away to right-handers, and he's lacked that legit secondary for a long time. His four-seamer is there to excel at the top of the zone. The sinker is a great pitch underneath it, and that slider is a game changer for him. So I'm really excited to see how it's going to continue to evolve for him across the season. He hasn't had the best success as of late. Even this past weekend was a little bit of a struggle. However, I do trust that pitching lab to look at this pitch, see, okay, great, and you've added some sweep to it. You know how to use it a little bit better. I think Tyler McGill has those tools, and they're squeezing a lot more out of it this year than they have in previous seasons.
Yeah, and we'll get to some specific guys a little bit later too, but you mentioned Canning and McGill here, and I think for some fans, when you look at this, Nick, they're going to say, okay, we didn't have the high expectations for this pitching staff, and they're like, there's got to be risk here. So what's the biggest risk factor for this rotation as we get deeper into the season?
Well, traditionally, of course, it is health. And we just did see that with Kodai Senga, the last guy on this team that you really want to get hurt. But the other aspect of it are the general commands of these pitchers. Clay Holmes, we've seen that volatility as he did with the Yankees last year. Is he going to be able to also keep the stamina that he's showcased thus far later into the season? Griffin Canning has had a lot of issues throwing pitches in the middle of the plate with that slider and that changeup that he's avoided thus far, but it could start to creep back with him. And of course, with Tyler McGill specifically, we have not seen him as that ridiculous command four-seamer guy. It's something that goes in and out in rhythm. And we've been fortunate thus far to have a lot of these pitchers have their feel in the spring, but that could be something that fades as we get into July and August.
Something to keep your eye on there. Let's now look at some specific pitchers with the team. And I'm going to start with the guy you just mentioned, Kodai Senga, because he's looked even more dangerous this season, and now we know he's on the injured list. Tough blow for the Mets here, but doesn't look like it's going to be a long-term injury. Are you concerned about his injury at all here, Nick? And what changes or tweaks have you seen with Kodai Senga that has improved his game this season as opposed to what we saw from him in his rookie season and a little bit, last year when he came back at the end? But what changes or tweaks have you seen with Kodai Senga's game this year that's made him a better pitcher on the mound?
Absolutely. So one thing that's actually kind of interesting is we were wondering how many innings we would get out of Kodai Senga this year. After missing so much time in 2024, expecting a full 180 inning workload for Senga wasn't really a reliable projection. So now that we have this hamstring injury, which obviously is going to be a dent for the Mets, it's not as bad as it seems, simply because, well, there was going to be a logjam anyway with Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas being the reinforcements very soon anyway. And now you'll have Senga ready to go and more fresh than expected in September and hopefully in October as well, as the Mets are in a great position for a playoff run. So there is some benefit to that injury, as much as we obviously hate the Mets ace going down for a moment. And as far as how he's developed this year, in 2023, Kodai Senga showed up really with 3 pitches. We talk a lot about the Ghost Fork, and yes, that is a phenomenal offering, one of the best put-away pitches in baseball. That is when he's at 2 strikes. That Ghost Fork is as good as any other pitch at earning that strikeout. However, you got to get there. And the four-seamer isn't really that great of a pitch. We are seeing a lower velocity now. But the main glue of this arsenal for Kodai Senga is that cutter. It is a pitch that he throws for strikes inside the zone. And early on in the season, he wasn't actually utilizing it that much. And as he got on into May, it was being utilized closer to 20-25% of the time, much more effective, and also opened the door for him to throw these sliders, sweepers, sinkers, and curveballs in the mix. it just made it so that batters couldn't just rely on that four seamer and try to make contact on that, which really is not an above average four seamer. But mixed with that cutter inside the zone, those other kitchen sink pitches, Kodai Senga was able to set up that ghost fork considerably well. And I'm really honest, I am sad not to see it much in the near future, but it could work out really well for the Mets in the long haul.
Yeah, no, you make a good point, right? Where injuries happen in the season matter, and getting a guy like him to get some rest now at this point in the season, get healthy. You don't have to rush him back because the rest of the pitching staff has been pitching so well. And then you also, Nick, talked about, what everybody loves to talk about with Kodai Senga, that is the ghost fork. I agree with you. It is one of the best pitches in baseball to get a batter out, right? And it's been highly effective. But I guess for you, has the effectiveness of that pitch, or why it's been so effective, does that have to do with the stuff you've mentioned before, his ability to set it up with other pitchers, his ability to use the cutter? Why has it been so effective? And it seems like it's more effective this year than we saw from him in his rookie year. Would you agree?
Well, it is actually, it's weird. You can look at it in different ways. From one angle, you have the swing strike rate, which is a little bit lower, 24% than 27% in his rookie year. However, he gets more strikes with it. He's over a 60% mark on his strike rate, which is pretty much the threshold of us thinking, is this a reliable pitch or not? And back then, it was a 52% strike rate. As he used it a little bit differently, it's more behind this year, just a little bit more than it used to be. But again, more effective at getting that third strike or at least an out when thrown in two strikes this year for Kodai Senga. So that ghost fork is still incredible. He locates it really well too. There are a lot of guys who throw some form of a splitter and they don't do it reliably. It falls out of their hands toward their arm side. It floats up too often. But Kodai Senga is really, really good at getting out in front, staying on top of that pitch, and making sure it lands low. There are very few in the game as skilled as Kodai Senga to do that.
Yeah, he's one of the best in the game right now. You saw the pitches there that he's been throwing, ghost fork. It's been a killer thus far. Hopefully he comes back and he's healthy. Got to talk about another guy, David Peterson, because this guy's had an amazing turnaround. I don't think anybody could have seen this coming. Granted, he did pitch well at the end of last season, Nick. We did see that, and he's built on that here in 2025. What stands out to you about the way that he's attacking hitters right now?
Oh, man. Going back to swing strike rate, I think that's one of the better indications you can look at for just a pitch inside the arsenal. Is this guy filthy? Is he doing things that are just making it really tough for batters? And last year, that slider was at an 18% swing strike rate. It went up to 21% this year. It was also one of those pitches for David Peterson that he would go in and out on. It wasn't the same kind of movement prior, but this year he's really executing that slider well. The changeup is coming into form too. And again, leaning into that extension is so huge for David Peterson. And to see that he's actually able to locate that four-seamer upstairs effectively. Same with the sinker, and not be the 54% strike rate four-seamer that he used to be before, but now it's 65% that he can actually rely on that upstairs to get his outs is massive. It's really all of those pitches coming together for David Peterson. You don't really see the high velocity. He's at 92, 93, pretty much the same as last season. But mix that four-seamer with a sinker. Guys can't pick up which one it is. Is it going to move this way or that? The extension gives them less time to react to it. And then you have the changeup and that killer slider underneath it. It's a really good mix when they all come together, and Peterson is having all four pitches firing on all cylinders more often.
Yeah, no, he's been good. We did a little something on him a while ago about how good he's been, and he looks confident right now on the mound. There's no doubt about this. Now, another guy who you mentioned earlier in this Mets rotation, and I think we all have to be honest, Griffin Canning. Nobody saw this coming. I know he struggled his last two starts. I understand that, but overall, he's been pretty solid. What's been the biggest development with him since joining the Mets? Is what we've seen from him thus far, prior to his last two starts, is it legit, or is this just we saw a hot stretch of Griffin Canning and now that's faded away? Do you think this is legit?
It is really hard to tell. On one side of it, you have that changeup and that slider getting a lot more movement than it did in the past. The changeup and slider each have about 3 to 4 inches more drop this year. And last year, what we saw with Griffin Canning having one of the worst ERAs in baseball, 5.19 across 32 games and 171 innings, that was a product of him throwing these sliders that were just over the plate. I call it dancing with the disco, like Anthony Descafani or Tony Disco, who would just throw about 45% sliders over the zone, not really well spotted, and he would get away with it. Griffin Canning would do that with his changeup. and also throw these four seamers that are really, really hittable over the plate too often. But with the Mets this year, he's done two things really well. One is keeping that slider down and not just in the middle of the plate, but actually well located to right-handers and lefties alike, while also being tepid with the four seamer. If you have a bad pitch, you don't really want to throw it over the plate and you don't want it to be a ball in play. So what Griffin Canning does is he works a bit backwards. He keeps that pitch out of the zone a lot. It showcases, hey, I have 93, 94. Think about that thing. But then hopefully you hit that changeup and that slider in play. And that has been very effective for him thus far. Recently, we've seen the four seamer find a little bit more balls in play, which aren't very good for him. And hopefully that gets tweaked a bit moving forward.
Yeah, we'll see what adjustments he can make. He needs to bounce back in his next start coming up this week. Now, Clay Holmes, he's been impressive in his transition to being a starter, coming out of being a bullpen guy. What do you see in his current pitch mix that makes him so tough to hit? That's one part of the question. Another thing I wanted to add to this, Nick, too, is we saw the other night he was pulled after 79 pitches. Do you think the Mets are maybe a little bit concerned about making sure he's fresh down the stretch here? Maybe you'll see them, Carlos Mendoza, that is, pull him out a little bit earlier of games going forward.
Yeah, it is an interesting question, right? I have been under the belief that if you are a reliever for a full season, that is equivalent to a workload of starting in a different way, right? It is not necessarily the stamina game, but it is the intensity game. And to throw a full year is pretty close to the same workload, even though it's not the same amount of pitches. It's tougher to do that going up and sitting down. It is a strain on your arm that's very similar. However, it is a different skill set to go through the year, and you don't want to overwork a guy right now when you're in this for the long haul like the Mets are. So Clay Holmes, what has impressed me a lot is his wide arsenal. He didn't really need it while he was a member of the Yankees, and as a reliever, you're not really encouraged to have a massive arsenal because you want to make sure you're in rhythm in the smaller sample that you have and say, look, this is what I do for this situation. This is what I do for another. You don't need to have multiple looks against the same batter in a single game. However, seeing a sinker, a sweeper, a slider, a changeup, a four-seamer, even a cutter this year for Clay Holmes is helping massively. It's not the most consistent arsenal, but when you have so many pitches, it means that you can turn to whatever is working on a given day. And to his credit, I expected a lower strike rate on his sinker. I expected a lower strike rate on his slider, but both of them are excelling this season, and both of them are generally hard to hit. So with a guy that has a lot of pitches that move a lot and has a wide variety of things to choose from, it's going to be tougher for batters to figure out what's happening, even when they face him the second, third time through the lineup. And that is how Clay Holmes has gone through it. It's not a lot of whiffs, but it's hard to hit, and that has allowed him to go deeper into games.
Yeah, no, Holmes has had a lot in his bag this season, and he's shown it all throughout his starts. He's been really good for the Mets, and I think that's really been a huge development in the success of their pitching staff. But when you look at the success of this pitching staff, Nick, how much has this level of starting pitching that we've seen changed the ceiling of this Mets team as we start looking towards the trade deadline? Because, you know, once you start winning, you start pitching at a certain level. Now, David Stearns might be looking at some different things that he can do. So how they've pitched thus far this season changed their ceiling right now?
It is an interesting conversation because what makes a winning ball club? You have different goals when you have a starting rotation. It's either get through the season or win the World Series. And what the Mets have right now is a great series of depth with getting through the season. But I wouldn't feel confident in just Kodai Senga and then, well, who is the number two? Is it going to be Sean Manaea? It's hard to tell if he's actually going to have the same kind of success they did last year. We haven't seen him all year, of course. Is it Clay Holmes? Is it David Peterson? We don't know right now what we're going to get out of these guys in September. And I personally would feel that the Mets are in a phenomenal position to go and get that other stud pitcher on top of all of this. You don't need the depth right now. You might be in a situation where you need it later on. Enjoy those bags of riches of options. But I do believe the Mets have a better ceiling for the regular season than they did before. However, they still need to add that one major piece to really become major playoff contenders.
I like that. I like how you put that there because you could have a rotation that is built perfectly for the regular season, but are they built for the postseason? That is another question, something David Stearns and company are going to have to answer. But if we're going to stack them up against other teams and compare them, when you look around the National League, how does this Mets rotation stack up against other top teams with their pitching, like the Cubs, like the Dodgers? How do you like the Mets against those teams?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because you have the Dodgers who don't have a good regular season rotation right now, but their strategy is saying, look, we have all of these stud pitchers. We don't really need them to be all that great in the regular season because we have such a good offense and we have so many different arms to throw out there. It's going to be fine, and they're confident in that. And that means that they are resting up Blake Snell and Tyler Glasnow. They're going to be okay for the World Series run while the Mets don't have the same quality of reinforcements, even if we want to believe that Sean Manaea will be the same guy as he was in the second half of last year. Now, with the Cubs are in an interesting situation, and we should be expecting them to be very active in the trade deadline. We've seen rumors of them being attached to the Sandy Alcantara, for example, and it does make a lot of sense as the Cubs do have Shota Imanaga, which is going to be a great ad for them. Matthew Boyd is there, but they're still figuring out exactly how they are going to have a quality playoff rotation. And I expect it's going to be Mets versus Cubs a little bit during the last weeks of July to hopefully snag a major, major trade piece.
All right, so you think they'll be battling each other for a major trade piece? And I guess that was where I was going to go. My next question is, where do you think the Mets should be aggressive at the deadline, right? Does this staff need another arm in the starting rotation? And you're talking about an elite arm, or should they roll with what they have right now and maybe just focus in on bolstering the bullpen or trying to add more depth? What do you think are the missing ingredients that the Mets should look to add to their pitching staff right now?
I mean, it's hard really to deny the fact that someone like Sandy Alcantara can do wonderful things for this team. It's a case where you need to have a statement. And I know that doesn't seem like the greatest analysis that I've ever given. However, the Mets, we all know this, are a morale team. We have seen September before in New York not go as planned. And if the Mets were to make that kind of big move, I cannot express enough how much of an impact that can make, not just to go out of the regular season on a high note, but that will carry into the playoffs. And if a team like the Cubs go off and get somebody, maybe it's the Diamondbacks even who could be going for that wild card spot as well, could even be the Giants in some fashion. If the Mets feel like they are not a part of that crowd of not really being improved, well, it could be really tough feeling that momentum in their favor come October. So I would say yes, there is room to grow inside the rotation. You can always add another bat. You can always add another bullpen piece. However, we all know the playoffs can be won with two studs at the helm, and the Mets don't have that right now.
Yeah, so they should be aggressive. And listen, Nick out here reminding the Mets fans of past trauma, how Septembers have not always gone well for them. You see, I see what you did there. I like it, but it's true, though. It's true. So
it is
sometimes
true.
You got to make a move to protect against that. I hear you, man. Mets fans know. Mets fans watch the show. They know.
I try to give a lot of references here, including the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast, of course. But no, it is something that you have to, I think, as a Mets organization, go out of your way to prevent.
Yeah. No, I be proactive. Do not be reactive. I don't disagree with you on that. Now, Nick, you watch a ton of pitchers. I'm trying to tell folks, Nick watches a lot of pitching. He's saying a little. He watches a lot. Trust me. Which Mets pitcher has been the most fun for you to personally break down this year? Who have you really enjoyed watching and breaking down their game?
Oh man, I would say the story of Tylor McGill, as I like to call him, is the most interesting because if there is a pitcher who has the most untapped potential, it is him. It is a four-seamer that has phenomenal extension, and those games where he's able to actually locate that four-seamer upstairs and then put the sinker underneath it, and then have that new slider actually work down in glove side, it is glorious. I still think about that strikeout against Juan Soto. I believe it was 2021 or maybe it was 22 when Jacob deGrom was hurt and he had to step in on opening day instead, and he was incredible at 99 miles per hour. That ability is still there. So I would say Tylor McGill is the one I keep watching. I do have to mention, I wonder when Jonah Tong gets his chance in this Mets rotation. I wonder when Blade Tidwell shows up. These are good quality pitchers in AAA for the Mets. That could also be that later impact. I think I'm going to be really excited watching them when they make their debuts.
I'm,
And
I'm
also, of course, Tidwell returns.
I'm glad you brought them up. Of those two, I'm glad you brought it up. We take a little sidebar here, but of those two, Tong and Tidwell, who do you like as having the better upside? Because you're hearing a lot of Mets fans. We're going to talk about this more in a couple coming weeks. Will either of those guys get a shot this year in the bigs? That I'm not sure about. But who do you like in terms of upside? Doesn't have to be this year, Nick, but just to contribute to this Mets organization down the road. Which guy, Tong or Tidwell, do you like more?
Well, Tidwell seems like someone who has some of the tools, but it does seem like a little bit more of a cap ceiling as far as just the overall stuff. Jonah Tong, I can't give you as much data as I want because AA data is more protected, unfortunately.
Yeah.
However, everything that I've seen suggests that there is a higher ceiling with Tong. And that's what I mean when I get so excited. I want to see him. I want to be able to break this down and really truly understand him. I would be excited about both. Be a little cautious about Tidwell. I think he's more equipped to be a SP number 4 or so and actually be a very effective guy that will have those wonderful moments. But Jonah Tong does look like someone that could really, really get Mets fans excited.
Yeah, I know it's AA. He's been tearing it up down there, and so he is on the rise. We will see how his development goes. Last thing for me here, Nick, if this level of pitching that we've seen from the Mets continues, right? I know the fans are, in their feelings a little bit after this weekend against the Rays, but do you see this Mets team as a legit contender, and what will be the biggest key to maintaining this pace the rest of the season if this group stays the same or if they add a bigger piece to the starting rotation? What's going to be the keys there?
Absolutely. Sean Manaea, I think, is a really, really central piece, really to cover the ground of Kodai Senga being out for about 6 weeks or so from now. It's also about squeezing out the most that they can from this depth. It is a surprise that they have as much depth as they do. I mean, Paul Blackburn actually giving decent innings is not something that's expected here at all. Frankie Montas, I'm very curious to see what we're going to get out of him. He had moments in Milwaukee last year where he increased his velocity and produced effectively for about a month or so. Maybe the Mets will get something out of him as well and be able to produce across 5, 6 innings consistently. But it's really, really about this depth holding. The injury bug, despite having 2 guys that were supposed to be a significant part of this rotation on the IL for so long, they've been very fortunate. Clay Holmes, Canning, McGill, Peterson making regular starts here. I hope that holds for them. And that's really the biggest thing I'm going to be focusing on is hopefully they don't get into a position where they need to call a Blade Tidwell or Jonah Tong.
Yeah, health is wealth. And the Knicks, said the Knicks, so we were talking about the Knicks before this. The Mets need to stay healthy as possible. See, you talked to me about the bounce with the Knicks before, and then it got in my head. And, I was about to say the Knicks. That's a different show. That's New York.
If they were named the Dexters, you would be even more heartbroken.
Fair enough. But you know what? From this conversation, I take you're optimistic about this Mets pitching staff. I think you're right to be cautiously optimistic with the health. You need to see the health. Everybody needs that. And we'll see. But so far, they've overperformed in terms of expectations. They've got some arms on the way. We'll see how the Mets pitching staff looks. But everybody, that is Nick Pollack. Check him out, founder of the Pitcher List. That is, if you love pitching, that is a site you need to check. Nick is going to be back here on Straight Outta Flushing to talk more about the Mets rotation. Hopefully good stuff. We hope later when he comes back it's good stuff. Nick, I always appreciate you coming on to talk with me about some pitching. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's always a blast.
All right, time to step off the field for a minute. See what's popping around Mets social this week. This is Mets Mention. And first up, got a little mascot drama brewing. You remember Dinger, the Colorado Rockies mascot, shooting a shot at Mrs. Met last week? Well, she saw it. And she answered. Mrs. Met pulled out her own sign at Citi Field this week to deliver a savage 2-liner. Says, my husband has bigger biceps. Take a hike, Barney. Yeah, Dinger, you might want to take that L back to Denver. And speaking of mascots or people in costume, this week marked the anniversary of one of the greatest first pitch moments of all time. Yes, Grimace, the purple legend himself, steps up to the mound, fires one up, quarter pounds the zone, and becomes a cult hero in Mets history. Every time I see that pitch, it gets better. Grimace then took to X to share that he misses the old days and how beloved he was in Flushing last year, and apparently he's been working on his pitching. Promises that he's not serving up any meatballs here, folks. The Mets record since Grimace threw that first pitch is 106-63. That's a 627 winning percentage, and the team has pitched with 3.40 ERA in that time. Can we get Grimace back for the alumni game in September? I think that needs to happen. And last but not least, congrats to Jeff McNeil and his family. They added a new pup to the lineup as they adopted a dog. There you see Jeff and the fam with their new canine friend. Name is Jocko. Seems like he's making himself at home. Well, looks like T. McNeil is officially a two-dog household now. So what did we learn this week on Mets Mention? Well, Mrs. Met, she's got standards. Grimace knows how to throw a heater. And Jeff McNeil can't stop loving the dogs. Let us know what we should highlight next time on Mets Mention, where the off-field action stays undefeated. It's time for the final out. This week, we've already talked about dominant pitching, but we also have to talk about the good vibes at Citi Field. Now, if you've been to Citi Field lately, you know that something's happening. You can feel it in the air. The crowd is louder, the energy is higher, and the Mets, they're straight up unbeatable at home. This week, David Peterson gave the crowd a moment to remember. The lefty, he was in full command on Tuesday night, firing a complete game shutout against the Nationals. Only 7 starters in all of baseball have thrown a complete game shutout this year, and Peterson just joined that elite club. And it wasn't just the stats. On his way out for the ninth, the Citi Field crowd, they rose up, they let him feel the love, the ovation. It was dope. The LFGM shout in the postgame interview and the hug with catcher Luis Torrens. Come on, you gotta love that moment. This is a pitcher who's legit right now. 11 of 12 starts with 5+ innings, not once allowing more than 3 earned runs, and it's happening in a ballpark that's quickly becoming one of the toughest places to play in baseball. Check this out, folks. The Mets, they have a 27-9 home record. That is the best in baseball. They're 2.84 home ERA, third lowest in the league. Now at night, even better. They're 17-5 under the lights. That's a 773 winning percentage. The crowd feels it too. Attendance is up over 12,000 fans per game compared to last year. That's the biggest jump in baseball. And if you're wondering if this is a fluke, nah, it's not. Since July of 2024, the Mets have the best home winning percentage in the entire league. That's better than the Dodgers. That's better than the Phillies. Better than anyone, people. So yeah, the lights are bright. The mound belongs to David Peterson, and Citi Field is the place to be this summer. All right, we're going to put this episode of Straight Outta Flushing in the book. Special thanks to my guest this week, Nick Pollack of Pitcher List. Thanks to my producer, Erica Block, associate producer, Nick Federico, editor, Corey Porter, and production assistant, Tommy Cohen. I'm Dexter Henry, and we will return next week with another edition of Straight Outta Flushing.